Welcome to the show, my country people. We're diving deep into a topic that affects every Kenyan puppet MPs. These aren't your friendly neighborhood puppeteers putting on a show for kids. We're talking about members of parliament, elected officials who are supposed to represent the people, but instead dance to the tune of hidden masters. Imagine a parliament full of representatives passing a bill that millions of Kenyans, just outside the same parliament, are asking them to reject. Who are they really representing? Who elected them? To do what? Damn it, these puppet MPs, they're like chameleons, blending in with their fellow parliamentarians. But their loyalty? It doesn't lie with the people, it lies with the puppet masters pulling their strings, often from the shadows.
These puppet masters, they come in different shapes and sizes. Some are seasoned politicians, veterans of the game who know every trick in the book. They've built their empires on patronage, on favors owed, on a system where loyalty is bought and sold.
Others are wealthy businessmen, tycoons who see politics as another avenue to expand their wealth and influence. They fund campaigns, they bankroll lifestyles, they whisper in the ears of those in power, all to ensure their interests are protected. In Kenya, party loyalty often trumps national interest, with party leaders acting as the ultimate puppet masters.
When MPs are beholden to their puppet masters, it's the people who suffer. Development projects stall, resources are misallocated, and the gap between the rich and the poor widens.
But it's not just about the tangible consequences. The real tragedy lies in the erosion of trust. When citizens see their elected officials as mere puppets, their faith in democracy wanes. Cynicism takes root, voter apathy sets in, and the very idea of a government that serves the people becomes a distant dream.
Stay tuned as we expose the strings, unmask the puppeteers, and shed light on the hidden power dynamics that shape Kenya's political landscape. Before we talk about puppet MPs, we need to rewind the tape. Go back to the time when Kenya was under colonial rule. The British, they weren't interested in nurturing a democracy in Kenya. Their goal was control, pure and simple. They propped up local chiefs, gave them a taste of power, but always with strings attached. These chiefs, they became the original puppet MPs, carrying out the will of the colonial masters in exchange for privilege and a semblance of authority. Now, fast forward to independence in 1963. Did things magically change overnight? Not a chance. The faces in power might have changed, but the system, the mentality, it lingered. The first president, Jomo Kenyatta, he consolidated power, using some of the same tactics as the colonialists. And so began the era of patronage and political maneuvering, where loyalty was rewarded and dissent was met with swift and often brutal consequences. The 1980s saw Kenya slide into a one-party state.
With only one party in town, KANU, the competition for political office, it wasn't about ideas, it wasn't about serving the people. It was about pleasing the party bosses, the big men who controlled the purse strings and decided who got a seat at the table.
Parliament became a rubber stamp, approving whatever the executive branch put forward. Dissent was practically non-existent. Those who dared to raise their voices, to question the status quo, they were branded as dissidents, enemies of the state. But even in the darkest of times, a flicker of hope remained. Kenyans never gave up on the dream of a truly democratic society. The 1990s ushered in a new era in Kenya, an era of multi-party democracy. Finally, Kenyans had a choice, a chance to elect leaders who truly represented their aspirations. But old habits die hard. While the transition to multi-partyism opened up the political space, the legacy of puppetry didn't disappear overnight. Political elites found new ways to exert their influence, to control the narrative, to maintain their grip on power. Money became a powerful tool, used to bankroll campaigns, to buy loyalty, to silence dissent. The puppet masters might have changed their tactics, but their goal remained the same: to maintain control, to protect their interests, and to keep the people at bay. Politics, my friends, it ain't cheap. Running for office in Kenya, it takes a mountain of money.
Enter the puppet masters, wallets wide open, ready to bankroll the campaigns of those who promise to do their bidding.
They expect their puppets in parliament to repay their generosity with favorable votes, with access to government contracts, with a blind eye turned to their shady dealings.
It's a transactional relationship, plain and simple. Many aspiring politicians find themselves caught in this web of financial dependence. The result? A parliament where the voices of the people are drowned out by the clinking of coins, where national interest takes a back seat to personal gain.
Now, let's talk about party discipline, or should I say party dictatorship. In Kenya, political parties wield immense power over their members, especially those in parliament. The party whip? He's like the headmaster, keeping everyone in line, making sure they toe the party line. Any sign of dissent, any attempt to vote according to one's conscience, and the whip comes cracking down. Demotions, suspensions, expulsion from the party, these are just some of the punishments meted out to those who dare to step out of line. And let's not forget the power of the party leader, the big man, the ultimate puppet master. It's a system that stifles debate, that discourages independent thought, that turns elected officials into puppets, their strings pulled by those who hold the reins of power. Politics in Kenya, it's often said, is about who you know, not what you know. And when it comes to controlling puppet MPs, patronage is king. Jobs, contracts, development projects, these become bargaining chips used to reward loyalty and punish dissent.
It's a vicious cycle where political power is used to dispense favors, to buy influence, to maintain control. And the people, they're caught in the middle, often forced to choose between their principles and their basic needs. The system is designed to keep the people dependent, to make them complicit in their own oppression.
Good governance relies on a fundamental principle: accountability. Elected officials are supposed to be answerable to the people, their decisions transparent, their actions open to scrutiny. But when you've got puppet MPs, accountability goes out the window. These puppets are more concerned with pleasing their masters than serving their constituents. This lack of accountability creates a breeding ground for impunity. Corruption thrives when those in power know they can act with impunity. The very fabric of society is eroded when those entrusted with power choose loyalty over integrity, self-interest over the common good.
Now let's talk about progress, or rather, the lack thereof. Kenya, we've got so much potential, so much to offer the world. But time and again, we find ourselves stuck in a rut, our progress hampered by the very people who are supposed to be leading the way. Puppet MPs, they're not interested in rocking the boat, in pushing for meaningful change.
This leads to a culture of gridlock and inaction. Important bills gather dust in Parliament, crucial reforms are stalled, and critical issues affecting ordinary Kenyans are swept under the rug. It's a tragedy to see a nation held hostage by its own elected officials, their strings pulled by forces more concerned with maintaining their grip on power than with building a better future for all. Corruption, my friends, it's a cancer that eats away at the very core of a nation. And when you've got puppet MPs, they become enablers. Their silence and inaction fueling the flames of this destructive force. Contracts are awarded not on merit, but on connections. Public funds are diverted to private accounts. This rampant corruption has a devastating impact on our nation. It robs us of resources that could be used to build schools, hospitals, and roads. It's a vicious cycle, and breaking free from its grip will require a collective effort, a commitment to accountability, transparency, and good governance.
Democracy hinges on a sacred principle, the will of the people. But when you've got puppet MPs running the show, elections become a cruel illusion, a facade of choice behind which the real power brokers operate. These puppet masters understand that their grip on power depends on controlling the levers of democracy. They manipulate the electoral process, rigging elections, buying votes, and silencing dissenting voices, all to ensure that their chosen few get to call the shots.
It's a slap in the face to the very idea of democracy, a betrayal of the trust that citizens place in the electoral process. When the people's voices are silenced, when their votes are rendered meaningless, is it any wonder that cynicism and apathy towards democracy begin to take root? Section 2. The erosion of trust, cynicism, and apathy in the face of puppeteering. One of the most insidious consequences of puppet MPs is the erosion of trust.
When citizens see their elected officials as mere puppets, their faith in democracy, in the very idea of a government that represents their interests, begins to dwindle. They see through the empty promises, the grand pronouncements that ring hollow in the face of lived realities. They witness firsthand how their elected representatives, instead of championing their needs, prioritize the interests of their puppet masters, often at the expense of the common good.
This disillusionment, it breeds a sense of helplessness, a belief that nothing they do, nothing they say can change the system. Voter turnout plummets as people lose faith in the power of their vote. Civic engagement wanes as citizens retreat into their private lives, resigned to the reality that their voices don't matter, that the system is rigged against them. This apathy, my friends, it's a slow poison, eating away at the very soul of our democracy. It creates a vacuum, a void that is all too easily filled by those who seek to maintain the status quo, by those who benefit from a system that silences dissent and rewards blind obedience. Section 3. The Price of Silence. How public apathy enables the puppet masters. The puppet masters, they thrive on public apathy. It's the fertile ground in which their schemes take root, the silent accomplice to their manipulations. When citizens disengage from the political process, when they choose silence over speaking truth to power, they unwittingly empower the very forces that undermine their well-being. See, my friends, democracy, it's not a spectator sport. It requires active participation, a willingness to hold those in power accountable, to demand better from our leaders. But when apathy reigns supreme, when silence becomes the norm, the puppet masters are free to operate with impunity, their strings pulling the levers of power unchecked. The price of silence, it's steep. It's the perpetuation of corruption, the erosion of good governance, the widening gap between the haves and the have-nots. It's the stifling of dreams, the suppression of aspirations, the denial of opportunities for a better future. The time has come, my friends, to break this cycle of apathy. We must rediscover our collective voice, reclaim our power as citizens, and demand a democracy that truly represents the will of the people, not the whims of puppet masters operating in the shadows. Case study: The Curious Case of the Missing Voices. Remember that controversial bill a while back?
The one that directly impacted the lives of ordinary Kenyans.
Remember how the entire nation seemed to be talking about it?
Those few, my friends, were the puppet MPs, the ones who remained eerily silent.
While their constituents were up in arms, these puppets remained mute.
Where were the fiery speeches, the passionate arguments?
Nowhere to be found. Instead, we got awkward silences. Beyond the headlines, spotting the puppet master's influence. How can we spot these puppet masters?
They operate in the shadows, pulling strings from behind the scenes.
Their influence, my friends, it's not invisible.
Look beyond the headlines, pay close attention to the voting patterns in Parliament.
Notice how certain MPs consistently vote against bills that would benefit their people. Unmasking the Puppeteers, a call to action. We've journeyed deep into the heart of Kenyan politics, folks, shining a light on the shadowy world of puppet MPs and the puppet masters pulling their strings.
We've seen how this insidious system, with its roots in our colonial past, continues to plague our nation, undermining our democracy, stifling progress, and eroding public trust.
But awareness, my friends, is just the first step. It's time to move beyond outrage and channel our anger into action.
We must unmask these puppet masters, expose their machinations, and hold them accountable for the damage they've inflicted upon our nation.
We need to scrutinize campaign financing, follow the money trail, and demand transparency from those who seek to buy influence within our political system.
Let's empower the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission, give them the teeth they need to go after the corrupt, the power brokers, the ones who think they're above the law.
We need to strengthen our institutions, make them more resilient to manipulation, and ensure that they serve the interests of the people, not the whims of a select few.
The judiciary, the media, civil society organizations, they all have a crucial role to play in holding those in power accountable.
Let's support investigative journalism, the kind that digs deep, exposes the truth, and doesn't shy away from naming names. Reclaiming our democracy towards a Kenya free from strings.
It's about reclaiming our democracy where the voices of the people are heard loud and clear.
It starts with us, the citizens. Educate ourselves, understand the issues.
Support candidates with integrity who serve the people.
Demand accountability, scrutinize their voting records.
The power is in our hands. Let's use it wisely.